Writing conferences are an incredible opportunity to connect to the literary world, and I recently attended my first one. What did I do? Who did I meet? And what kind of resources were available to aspiring authors? In this video, I'll share my experiences at AWP 2025 and reflect upon how I'd approach future conferences. My last video broke down how I prepared for the conference and my first impressions, so please check it out if you're interested. AWP stands for the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. It's the biggest annual conference in the US, with over 600 tables at the book fair and 375 scheduled events. I arrived at the convention center around 11 a.m. I wanted to have a big breakfast first, and the first panel I wanted to attend was at noon, so I had some time to kill. I decided to hit the book fair. With over 600 tables, I was quickly overwhelmed. Luckily, I stumbled up to CLMP first, the community of literary magazines and presses, the perfect place to start. I was enthusiastically helped and guided towards appropriate presses and literary magazines. They even gave me a printout. They also let me take a photo of a list of genre-focused presses. Now that I had more direction, I popped over to The Fabulist, a small press that was very friendly and open to my questions concerning publishing. Josh gave me some recommendations and was very considerate. Taking Courtney Mom's advice from last video, I really should have bought something. After that, I headed to the tables of Whiskey Tit, Friction, and Write or Die magazine. My intention behind those visits was to narrow down what they might be seeking in terms of submissions, whether it was for a literary magazine or a small press. What kind of style of writing is a good fit? How long? Things of that nature, and everyone was very helpful. Once again, I should have bought something from those tables because they all felt like a good fit, and that would give me a much greater sense of who they've already published. The reason I'm looking more into publishing for short stories or writing competitions is because it's a great way to build credentials for literary agents, to draw some attention to my writing. After totally losing all sense of time schmoozing and having fun at the book fair, I realized I was about to miss the start of the first panel I was interested in. So I hightailed my way out of the book fair and up to the second floor where the panels were being held. It ended up being a lot of walking, and my knee was a little taxed, so I was grateful to sit down. The first panel I attended was called Magic, Ghosts, and the Uncanny, the Hidden Logic of Fiction. In this panel, authors will discuss how magic, ghosts, and the uncanny influence the stories they tell. They will explore the tensions between genre-bending narratives that set out to complicate conventions with traditions and expectations firmly steeped in mystery, horror, and/or fantasy. How do authors working in or outside of these traditions write compelling stories? The panel was hosted by Claire Jimenez, a Puerto Rican writer from New York City and an assistant professor in English and African American Studies at the University of South Carolina. She's the author of Staten Island Stories and What Happened to Ruthie Ramirez. The authors featured on the panel were Grace Elizabeth Butler. She is a fabulous fiction author whose short stories can be found in journals such as The Thieving Magpie, Jersey Devil Press, Doubly Mad, and others. She currently serves as the editor-in-chief of The Fantastic Other, a magazine of mixed literary and speculative works. Olufunke Ogundimu is an assistant professor of English at Mississippi State University and editor at the African Poetry Digital Portal. She holds a PhD in English from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and is a graduate of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas MFA International Program in Fiction. Raul Palma is the author of A Haunting in Hialeah Gardens and In This World of Ultraviolet Light Stories. Palma is the Associate Dean of Faculty and New Initiatives at Ithaca College's School of Humanities and Sciences. He earned his PhD at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Big disclaimer, these are not direct quotes. I did my best and took notes, but it may not be verbatim. Claire asked the panel, how do you approach the use of magical, ghostly, fantastical, or uncanny elements in your fiction? Olufunke, there's no line between supernatural and real in my work. She then shared a passage from her book that had incredible imagery concerning the personification of the earth. Raul then explained he likes using the uncanny as a way to imagine the personification of your worst fear crawling into bed with you to cuddle. In his case, it was debt. When do you think these moves are useful for the story? Grace, fabulous fiction is more able to define the strange world younger generations are experiencing. Magical realism is a way to express climate grief. I found that statement to be very apt, and it's largely what drives me to write fantasy. I find it's easier to talk about our world and our nature by reframing it and examining it from a different perspective. In your work, do these elements stem from cultural traditions, personal beliefs, or narrative necessity? Olufunke, drawing upon her Nigerian heritage, the supernatural is reality in African storytelling. I found that to be fascinating. It's very different than the Western approach to storytelling. Raul answered this question by saying, magic, ghosts, and the fantastical are the kitchen itself, where you can bring a story together like an incantation. I really love how he phrased that, and I found it very inspiring. Supernatural elements aren't just tools you can use in your story, they can be the entire framework of it. Grace then added, when you find yourself stuck telling a story, the logical may not be the way forward. I think that's great advice and a wonderful way to break writer's block. Why not take your story in an unexpected direction? You can always reverse course if you need to, but there's joy in experimenting. At this point of the conference, I was very inspired, both from meeting people at the book fair and from this panel. I've been conceptualizing a story involving alien abduction, and a shorter version of it might be perfect for some of these literary magazines. Fortunately, the scheduling allowed ample time between panels, which allowed opportunity to introduce yourself, to ask some questions, and to slowly make your way over to the next event. Of course, the next panel was about as far away as possible, but it also brought me back closer to the book fair. This one was titled, Literary Rebels, Breaking and Remaking the Boundaries of Literary Genre. Despite new innovations and increasing interest in the field of hybrid writing, many publishers, agents, and publicists remain resistant to these forms, leaving authors uncertain as to how to find their audience. Established members of the publishing industry will discuss navigating the rules, written and unwritten, of literary genre and how to rebel against them effectively. We will discuss current trends in genre bending, blending, and experimentation, as well as opportunities for such work. I was very excited about this panel. It was moderated by Caroline Haygood. She's the assistant professor and director of undergrad writing at St. Francis College. She has published 7 books, most recently Death and Other Speculative Fictions and Goblin Mode, a speculative memoir. The authors on the panel were Clarence A. Haynes, a co-writer for the Omar Epps YA Afrofuturist series Nubia, The Awakening and The Reckoning. He's also the author of middle-grade nonfiction work, The Legacy of Jim Crow, and has worked as an editor for a variety of publishers, including Penguin Random House and Hatchet. J.P. Howard, whose debut collection, Say/Mirror, was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. She has received numerous fellowships and is the recipient of the Brooklyn Arts Council grant. J.P. curates Women Writers and Bloom Poetry Salon. Tarek Shah is the author of Whiteout Conditions, a Best of the Net Award nominee, and has recent work appearing in Pleiades Magazine, the Indianapolis Review, Electric Literature, Joyland Magazine, Diagram, Jubliat, Diode Poetry Journal, and elsewhere. Ji-won Choi is the author of One Daughter is Worth 10 Sons, I Used to Be Korean, and A Temporary Dwelling. She started her community garden's first poetry reading series, Poets Read in the Garden, to support local writers. Once again, these quotes may not be verbatim. I tried my best. Caroline asked, how would you define or describe hybrid writing, and how does your work fit into this category? Tarek, hybrid is a commitment to the original idea of a work. Allow art to maintain its uniqueness. Be uncompromising. Let the critics define it. Ji-won added, don't put me in a box. I totally understand that sentiment. It's very frustrating when your work is forced through a very narrow aperture. It feels like it's no longer what it was intended to be, which is largely why I had to deliberate so much with my query letter. How do I explain this concept concisely? Side note, at the conference, I wasn't brave enough to stick to my guns and say query. I said query. I didn't want to stand out. I'll be braver next time. Tarek then continued, as a mixed-race person, it's hard for people to categorize me, like with hybrid writing. And while that's not my experience, I can understand what he's expressing here. It's uncomfortable to conform to something that feels more like an approximation rather than the right fit. Why do you think publishers, editors, and agents might be resistant to hybrid writing? Since X meets Y is a classic format for pitching, why are hybrid works not as embraced by the publishing industry? And it's a good point. When you're mashing up genres, you're essentially doing just that. Clarence responded, X meets Y is a newer way of framing. He worked in publishing for 20 years, so he got to see some of these trends. He also mentioned that sci-fi fantasy was liberating for marginalized communities. In some cases, genre works allowed for greater flexibility from the publishing industry. How can other writers go about pitching this sort of work and getting it published? What is your advice for them? JP, we have to break something in my notes I can't read, I'm going to guess, our way in. Basically, you may not be embraced with open arms. You may have to fight to get in a bit. Clarence, form relationships and find allies. Find those who can support you. Ji-won, the small press movement is an act of rebellion and revolution, balance being practical and break systems that don't serve us. I was inspired by that fighting spirit, and it is important to remember that the big 5 publishers aren't the only options. Perhaps a smaller press is more likely to help me share the story I want to tell. She then recommended a number of micropresses, such as Salamander, Hanging Loose Press, A Wave Blue World, $2 Radio, Nightboat, and Storm Cellar. Caroline suggests publish in a magazine, attend literary events, visit professors during their office hours. You can meet people in weird ways and build a literary community. Tarek, the more you put in, the more the wheels turn to get a book published. Caroline, small presses allowed me to be my weird self. Tarek, come to terms with your work first to weather ups and downs. This is something I've touched on quite a bit. This whole process leaves you very vulnerable. It's hard to remain unflappable, but you need to find a way to stand behind your work. That doesn't mean you have to view it as perfect, but you have to stand by your expression of it. JP, getting a standalone piece published will boost your confidence. That's something I'm definitely going to pursue. Jiwan then recommended going old school. Send presses physical letters and arrange a reading with your colleagues. There's definitely something to that. In the world of online submissions, you can find a way to stand out from the herd by doing something different. After several members of the audience posed questions, I asked my own. How can you balance being committed to your original vision with being open to genuine constructive criticism? Tarek echoed a prior comment by saying, make peace with your project and then open it up to criticism. Basically, know what you're willing to fight for and stand by that, but don't close your ears off to suggestions. Caroline added, you have to be able to communicate your work to find an audience, and that's an important part you can't forget. Just because you have amazing ideas doesn't mean that you've expressed them in a way that people are receptive to. Clarence then helped put things in perspective. Most books are edited. Collaboration is integral to the process. Figure out what's important in your story and fight for that. It's hard when you feel like you're struggling to fit in and everyone else seems to have it all figured out. I felt a lot of solidarity from this group. After the panel, I happened to run into Tarek and had a great chat with him. He was incredibly supportive. I think it's very worthwhile being social at these events. I mean, that's partially what they're for. It's a wonderful way to connect to people. I was feeling satisfied and inspired by these two panels, but also ready to do something else. I took a break to get organized and have a snack. I hadn't had lunch, and I tend to get hangry, so I didn't want to have a meltdown on the book fair floor. After cross-referencing the list from CLMP, I had 10 tables I wanted to visit at the book fair. I ordered them sequentially so I could do a single lap across the floor instead of zigzagging back and forth. Some of these ended up being more specialized presses or literary magazines, so they weren't a good fit for me, but I'm glad I made the rounds and I was able to find some great fits. Some of them, like Silly Goose, Lanternfish Press, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and Punctum Books, were good fits, but maybe not for my fantasy manuscript. A better fit perhaps for the UFO abduction story that I'm developing. And I'm excited to start writing some more since I've been so focused on other aspects of the publishing world. It'll help keep me grounded. This last hurrah through the book fair took place around 4 p.m. on the last day of the conference. Some of the tables were empty. I also noticed the disposition was a little more surly, which I can totally understand. People want to go home. Perhaps buying something from the table first would have ingratiated me. Lesson learned. The benefits of a writing conference cannot be overstated. When else do you have the opportunity to have so many members of the publishing industry all in one place and willing to talk to you? It's a chance to form relationships with fellow authors, editors, agents, publishers, presses, anything you can think of. And there's a whole side of it I didn't even experience, the after parties. Nothing like a little liquid courage to facilitate social interaction. I also think engaging with people outside of the conference environment might be conducive to forming relationships. So what would I do differently next time? I'd do a bit more research up front. I'd have business cards, and I would definitely buy something from the tables. Luckily for me, I'll have an opportunity soon. The LA Times Festival Books is coming up in a few weekends, and I plan to attend. I hope to see you there on April 26th or the 27th.